Okay. Hopefully the recording has started, and I'll get started letting you know about family guided routines-based intervention. So we kind of thought we'd start with this slide. Wait, what's happening? Family guided routines-based intervention is something that many of you may have heard about over time. The kind of founder of the program, Julian Woods, has presented at the First Steps conference. The state has offered professional development webinars. So some of you may have heard information about it, and some of you, it may be brand new. But really, what it is we're working to train providers across the state on using a family-guided routines-based intervention strategy in their work with families. And we've been talking for years, I think, about leaving our toy bags in the car, and we've been talking about coaching families. And this is a way to actually give people the how-to on how do we do that? How are things supposed to look as we change our practice to really work on being family-guided and routines-based? So that's kind of where we're starting. Let's see. Family-guided routines-based intervention has been adopted as Indiana's model for providing services, and implementation really began this past January. And we're rolling this out in cohorts of about 50 people, 50 providers. And so this first cohort, we're moving through, and we've got about 38 people who probably will make it fully through this first cohort. So we wanted to be sure that service coordinators and eligibility determination team members, that you're aware that this initiative is underway. Not all the families that you work with will be impacted right away, but families working with participating providers will be. And so it's important that everybody on the team kind of recognizes what's happening. The goal is that 200 providers will be trained in the next 18 months. And I say that 18 months really starting from January of this year. And that is with the support of the team at Florida State University, who are really the creators of this family guided routines-based intervention. And they're really helping us make sure that we are training people with fidelity and accuracy, and then training some of this Indiana team, which includes Nancy and I, in being able to continue to move that forward as Florida State kind of steps out of the picture potentially. So our goal is really that more than 80% of First Steps providers are trained using the model. Obviously, if we're looking to do 200 providers in 18 months, that's going to be a slow rollout. It's going to take years to get there. And we know there's turnover in First Steps. And so we're really looking at ways to create this coaching model that can be sustainable and can continue to grow in the way that we train providers and continue to have people trained over time. Let's see. Nancy, I will let you take it from here.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier, I've had the privilege of being able to share information about FGRBI with our provider agencies. And so we started back in September, and up to this point, we have actually contacted and been able to share with 27 different agencies about FGRBI. And so the next bit of information, it's kind of dry because it's content heavy, but it's what we've been sharing with provider agencies. So you're getting a lot of the background about the framework, not so much about the application of the model, but we wanted to share that same message and information with you. So we're going to start with a video, and this is from the FGRBI website, and it demonstrates FGRBI in action during a home visit with Evelyn's family. And we've used this video to share at agency presentations as a way to just kind of talk about or introduce what FGRBI might look like and how that might be similar or possibly different than the way that First Steps providers are currently conducting home visits.
And I'm going to let this play, and Nancy, I'll be looking to you to make sure we've got the audio going on this one.
Okay.
two been? Good. How have you been? I've been
It's
good.
good.
When I first arrived at Evelyn's home, I just asked the family how things have been going because they're a busy family with multiple jobs, going back to school, and it's always nice to touch base and get a feeling for how they're doing as a family.
I like that it's a home visit. They worked a lot well with our schedule because like we work late nights, like we're up until like 4 and 6 o'clock in the morning. Yes, he works overnight. I work until 4 in the morning. So yes, so it did help a lot that they come to us. They ask us like, is this okay? A time to come and stuff like that.
I was able to observe the bubble activity and how that had been going for them, and they seemed really excited to show me it.
I taught her how to be like pop, pop.
Oh, good. And will she say pop?
I see like pop.
Oh, good. Can I see that? Can we see how it's going? Yay.
Bubbles.
They were excited to share with me that she was requesting the bubbles from them by the word for bubbles. So we talked a little bit about how they might be able to get her to ask them for more bubbles and open the bubbles and then blow more bubbles for Evelyn.
She just loves them.
Pop. Pop.
I love how you're modeling that word for her. Jesus held the bubbles, and he would wait for Evelyn to try and say bubbles, and both he and Mom would say bubbles, bubbles, more bubbles. And we talked about how if she even just looked at them or if she tried to make a sound that would be a good indication that she was ready for more bubbles.
Okay. And I like how you just keep modeling them more.
You want more bubbles?
A bubble.
Bubbles. Bubbles.
Look. Pop.
So then Dad would blow her some bubbles, and both Mom and Dad got really excited about modeling the word and popping the bubbles. Pop, 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 pop. And they were very excited because in that activity, they were able to hear Evelyn say bubba for bubbles and pop for popping the bubbles. So that was really exciting for them.
What do you think? How do you think we could get her to indicate she wants more bubbles? Or just more? Is
I
that
feel like the more.
Okay,
saying
good.
it more to her, you know.
Yeah.
Just the word more.
Yeah,
I
good.
don't know if
More
she-
bubbles?
I don't think she'd say it, you know, but she'll try. I like getting coached? I like getting coached because she's teaching me all these other stuff that I wouldn't have thought about teaching Evelyn, and I'm learning a lot. She gives me new ideas, for sure. It's working.
The beauty of family guided routines-based intervention is that through this practice, they've been able to open their eyes to learning opportunities throughout their whole day, and they've been able to find ways to encourage Evelyn's engagement and her communication in ways that they had never dreamt could be learning opportunities. Just getting breakfast in the morning or getting your clothes on to get dressed. These are things that they do every day, and they hadn't thought about them as opportunities for Evelyn to be learning before. And now I think they're finding ways to embed what we do during our visits throughout their whole day.
Being coached as a parent teaches me things that I didn't think about before. Like talking to her more, we describe what we're doing or like say what we're playing with.
I think this was a really exciting visit because Jessica and Jesus, they were coming up with great ideas. They were asking really great questions. They were able to do some problem solving. If something didn't work how they thought it would, they were coming up with new ideas. They were able to tell me other times throughout their day where they want to focus. So this was a visit when I really saw them take the lead on a lot of things, and that's always exciting.
All right, so what is FGRBI? We learned a little bit through the video. Just a reminder that Family Guided Routines-Based Intervention is known by that acronym FGRBI, and it's an approach that incorporates the Part C of IDEA legal mandates and guidelines to promote child-directed learning in functional everyday routines and activities with families and caregivers. And research has demonstrated that EI providers can best influence those developmental outcomes for young children by using family-centered and evidence-based practices that increase parent and caregiver confidence and competence and are provided through a collaborative, cross-disciplinary service delivery approach. Key principles and evidence-based practices of early intervention for professionals across disciplines are used in FGRBI and caregiver coaching. And FGRBI provides that systematic implementation within a flexible framework that allows for the family to make that plan for family participation, but even more importantly, for family leadership. That flexible framework promotes individualization based on the interests and needs of the young child, but also the priorities of the family. And then as families identify those priorities for their child and work as partners with their EI provider, outcomes are developed and supported by intervention strategies that they work together to figure out to be the most appropriate to address the child's IFSP outcomes. The FGRBI framework supports the triadic relationship between the parent, the child, and the provider to embed learning targets into meaningful and functional activities that the family identifies as their priorities. There's 4 core principles that are used to describe early intervention services in Part C of IDEA and delineate variations across approaches described in the literature and used in programs. And these 4 core principles are coordinated and collaborative family-centered practices that strengthen parent-child relationships and enhance the family's capacity to promote child development through embedded learning. And FGRBI incorporates a strong parent-caregiver role in the planning and implementing of the intervention, supporting the family as well as the family priorities, as well as the child's priorities. It engages parents and caregivers in the decision-making processes through the intervention, for example, by being intentional about choosing routines and activities that are centered not only on the child's interests, but also on the family's priorities. It emphasizes that learning occurs through natural parent and child interactions and participation in routines rather than scripted activities or intervention protocols. And it supports caregivers with coaching from EI providers as they learn to embed intervention, participate using intervention strategies, and make decisions about how they will embed throughout their day. And now a little bit about the history behind FGRBI. In 1990, FGRBI was coined as the Infant Toddler Activity-Based Intervention and described in the first issue of the Young Exceptional Child. In 1992, the first how-to guide on activity-based intervention outlined the theoretical constructs and shared implementation strategies for children ages birth through age 5. Evidence-based and informed practices were developed and field tested in various early intervention programs and funded projects to gather data on the specific features of FGRBI that were most acceptable to providers and caregivers. In 2004, the first data-based publication validating impact on caregiver and child was published in the Journal of Early Intervention. And since then, over 20 additional single case design, quasi-experimental, and randomized control studies have been conducted and reported. And there is a publication list available on the FGRBI website, and we'll share that link later in the presentation. Furthermore, some parent-implemented intervention research studies were conducted and have demonstrated that parents can use a variety of intervention strategies to promote those child outcomes consistently and also maintain their use of those strategies over time. FGRBI is constantly considering adult learning research and modifying and updating professional development resources and sequences based upon those current findings. FGRBI is a cluster of evidence-based and recommended practices that EI providers will teach or coach caregivers to use with their child. There's 4 key components, and caregiver coaching is the central hub of that, as illustrated in this diagram. First, you have family-guided, individualized, culturally responsive services and supports. And yes, that's a mouthful. Actually, Catherine, go back to that previous slide.
Sorry.
That's okay. FGRBI views the family as the decision maker and the leader. Services and supports are individualized for each family and reflect the family's culture and values. Priorities are determined by the family with coaching from the provider tailored to facilitate the family's ability to enhance their child's learning. Next is everyday routines, activities, and places. Children learn by doing, and so intervention takes place within those everyday routines and play, or the activities that the family is already doing day to day to provide for those authentic opportunities for learning. Next, we have functional participation-based outcomes. And we coach the caregivers to use those strategies that promote learning that's important and really matters to not only the child, but the family as a whole. And we help the family to think about those outcomes to help each child actively participate in family life. so that they have a role in the family's routines and they can help the family gain independence and competence in helping their child gain independence with those skills. Fourth, we have embedded instruction. FGRBI includes the use of evidence-based strategies to support the child's participation throughout the day by building on what the family already does that works and adding specific intervention strategies that promotes further learning within their daily routines. And as I said, at the core of that, in the center spoke, that's the caregiver coaching, and that supports each of those 4 components by informing and engaging families as decision makers and teachers in their child's life. Families learn about FGRBI through coaching by the provider, or stated another way, FGRBI is what the provider coaches caregivers to do. And just as FGRBI is individualized for each child and family, caregiver coaching engages parents in experiences to participate in opportunities designed specifically for them to build and strengthen their confidence and their competence in teaching their child. So what makes it family guided? And this is, all of us, the whole team in early intervention. The difference between many family-centered approaches and FGRBI is how the team engages and supports the caregiver, the family. In FGRBI, we respect the family as the child's nurturing and long-lasting support. And we recognize that families vary in their knowledge and understanding about how young children learn, about the different roles that caregivers and parents play in their child's development, how developmental delays and disabilities impact a child, and how we can best help a child learn. We recognize that parents and caregivers may not understand how early intervention works and how it can help them help their child. Families have many priorities and often in competition for their attention and resources, and we recognize that families love their children and want to support them in the best way. Also, we recognize that families have routines. They may not have a consistent schedule, but every family has activities that occur every day or multiple times each day that result in functional outcomes and can be used for teaching and learning opportunities. The team understands that before we can support the family sufficiently, we need to get to know them. And we listen to the family's priorities and dreams and support that decision-making on those outcomes, plans, and routines. It's the family's plan, not the provider's plan. Although the providers are the professionals currently going through the professional development sequence, understanding and helping guide the family really starts with those initial meetings and evaluations with the family. So all those rich conversations that you are having with families from the start help prepare them to take the lead and be the agent of change for their child. And the good thing about all of this process with FGRBI, all of us being active listeners to engage the family, to be the guide, really aligns perfectly with the life course framework as well. In the DEC recommended practices, you'll find that those family practices encompass 3 themes. And all of these things that we're doing with FGRBI align with the family capacity building. First one being family-centered practice, those practices that treat families with dignity and respect. They're individualized, flexible, and responsive to each family's unique circumstances. It provides family members complete and unbiased information to make informed decisions and involves those family members in acting on choices to help strengthen child, parent, and family functioning. And next is family capacity building practices, and those practices include opportunities to participate and experience. Those opportunities are afforded to families to help strengthen their parenting knowledge and skills and promote the development of new parenting abilities that enhance their current parenting skills and beliefs. And finally, family and professional collaboration. Those practices that build relationships between families and professionals who work together to achieve those mutually agreed upon outcomes and goals that promote family competencies and support the child's development. Next, we're going to talk about routines. And routines are those functional events of everyday life in which those consistent procedures provide a familiar framework for caregivers and for children to engage in teaching and learning. Routines are valued as the context for intervention with FGRBI. And they are functional, repetitive, and predictable, and that's why they are so valuable. Routines are common chores or everyday activities that offer opportunities to practice those meaningful skills in situations and settings that happen frequently during the day. Caregivers are available and interacting with their child to accomplish whatever that task is. In most routine, a positive outcome is achieved, such as getting dressed, reading a book, or eating a snack. Families identify many different activities that occur on a regular basis to promote teaching and learning opportunities. They may recognize things like building with blocks, reading a book, getting ready for a nap, choosing what the child wants for a snack or a drink as activities, or examples of different activities that they do every day. Families frequently identify caretaking routines such as dressing, meals, and bath time as well. But sometimes families can identify what they do, but they haven't necessarily made that connection to how their child can learn in these simple activities or everyday routines. So the first step is for caregivers to learn about routines and to recognize the value of the framework for teaching and learning. It's a familiar framework that allows the child to focus on new learning. So those skills like reaching, grasping and release of objects, using word combinations, engaging in a social game, all those skills that we're already working on in early intervention. And for the adult to focus on the key ingredients of that intervention. Those routines provide practice across the day in a variety of settings, and routines are motivating for the child and adult because it's not something extra, but it's embedded in their daily life, and it's interesting because that's a part of what they're already doing. One of the things providers are learning is to rethink the definition of a routine. FGRBI looks at these routines that are the family's priorities in everyday living.
The third component of FGRBI is really the development and the implementation of functional-based outcomes that are really guided by the family's priorities. And so when we talk about you all as a group, I think this piece is really important because you begin to do this with families before the provider who may be trained in this model even touches the family. So we're beginning to coach caregivers to use strategies that promote learning that matters to the family. So really thinking about what matters to the family becomes of utmost importance. And we're helping the family think about outcomes that help each child to actively participate in family life and help them gain independence. This is where you all really do have a great impact as you work with families to identify the outcomes as part of the eligibility in the IFSP process. In developing those IFSP outcomes, and there really are 3 key pieces of information that are useful when someone's implementing FGRBI. First, it's really critical to start with the parents or the caregiver's priorities about what they hope for their child and their family, what's most important or what's meaningful to them. And again, Nancy had alluded to, we're all very active listeners. That's part of our role. And even early in that IFSP development or within that eligibility determination experience for a family, that's what we want to be doing. We want to be listening to really what are the parents' care priorities, not necessarily what are we identifying as priorities. Special focus should really be placed on their desires related to participation in family and community activities. And for some families, that's easier than others, right? That conversation differs depending on the family and their experience. But it is the family's priorities, not the practitioners or the eligibility determination team's priorities that should serve for the basis as those high quality participation-based outcomes and goals. Outcomes and goals should really include those family priorities for themselves as well. Learning about how children learn and develop, why social interaction promotes lifelong learning, or how health and learning intersect. And I know, families bring those topics up to all of us when we're talking with them early in the process. Some of the things that families want to discuss are outside of, the traditional developmental pieces that people have looked at. It's also important to consider what's working at home, what's working in the community for a family, or maybe in the classroom if it's a child who's in childcare or home daycare. Building on those child and family strengths really facilitates positive interactions and additional opportunities for practice throughout the day. I think Nancy already used the words building confidence and competence in the caregiver. And that's something that the providers that are going through this training are hearing a lot. What are you doing to build the confidence and the competence of the caregiver? And it's a shift in mindset as opposed to what information am I sharing, to how am I building that confidence and competence. And then we also want to know what's been learned from observation, discussion, and assessment. And that information really is used to support the caregiver's ability to make informed decisions about their priorities and the specific strategies and steps to support their child's learning. When additional outcomes are added in the process, the intervention process provides a context for discussion of next steps for future child learning. And that's really important for you all as a group, because this takes place again before the service providers begin the intervention. And we know that all of you are working to make this process meaningful for families, that, you know, these are not just boxes that we're checking to get the paperwork done, that this, when we start this process, this is our chance to really let families know that they're in the lead, that they should be the leader throughout the process, whether it's writing the IFSP or having a single session with one of their providers, that they really are in charge of the process. And then we'll continue to talk about things, you know, we're kind of looking broadly at those functional outcomes, but then it's the ongoing providers who are working to kind of break those down into smaller targets or just right pieces of information that the family can address or embed in their daily routines. So if we're starting with a really good broad functional outcome, then that provider can work to identify some measurable goals, and then also break that down into an even smaller target that is easier for a family to identify and work on. The other big piece of family guided routines based intervention is a set of questions that really guide families' involvement in the process. And caregivers start to answer the what question when they identify their priorities and begin to write meaningful and functional outcomes on that IFSP. But again, those outcomes are often the big picture or the longer term goal. And so an outcome such as walking or talking, described in the IFSP, clusters a group of smaller or more specific skills that really, when learned, facilitate the accomplishment of the outcome. And so those smaller, more specific skills are what we call targets. Again, this is, you know, it's a word that's unique to FGRBI that we're hoping providers will start using with families. Again, thinking about really breaking down that bigger outcome of what the family wants to the smaller, more specific skills. And targets should really clearly identify what the caregiver will see, what they will hear or feel the child do within a routine or activity with their support. And getting to that what involves the caregiver and the provider really developing a plan that outlines the developmental steps or a sequence of behavior that leads to that outcome that is the priority of the family. And it really involves a lot of discussion that integrates the family's voice, preferences, opportunities. You know, what is the family really doing through the day? So that what is really not something that is identified, you know, early in the eligibility process. It really is a step or a sequence of skills that are identified through discussion with the caregivers within a routine. And the key factor when identifying the what is the developmental match between what the child's currently doing and then expectations for the new target. And I think one of the phrases that I've really enjoyed as I've been going through the training myself is up the ante. We want to be kind of upping the ante just a tiny bit. So we're scaffolding for families just so that they can continue to build on what they're already doing and push things just a little bit farther. Again, to build that confidence and competence of the caregiver.
Okay, now we're at embedded intervention, and that's a practice designed for teaching the child's IFSP outcomes in a way that's intentionally implemented in the context of those naturally occurring routines or activities in the home. And, it's a complex name, but really it's a pretty simple practice, one that maybe gets overlooked or maybe isn't completed with sufficient consistency and frequency in order for long-term learning to occur. But embedding intervention is simply including an intervention strategy at the moment that it's needed to support a child's response within a routine or an activity. And the goal of embedded intervention is to teach a child to use a skill when it's functional and meaningful. So a few slides ago, we mentioned those routines and targets. Catherine mentioned that, routines and targets kind of possibly new terms that certainly are related to FGRBI, and the ongoing service provider has the task of creating those goals and targets for the family or with the family. So this is kind of an illustration of the reasoning that takes place for embedding instruction in those natural learning opportunities. A lot of what we're learning is that we can tell a family to work on language during a morning routine, but that's not specific enough for adult learning. So by being very specific about the place, the routines, the targets, we know that learning will take place more consistently in those natural routines. So for example, looking at this illustration, Brian's mom has shared that she's been doing a lot of things for Brian just because it's quicker, it's easier. She's running around in the morning trying to get him ready for childcare, trying to get herself ready. And this is all happening after she's already got the siblings ready and on the bus for school. She has voiced that she would like to help him become more independent with that morning routine. But it's kind of worried, there's just so much going on. She's worried about it going badly and both of them ending up frustrated. So Brian's mom and the EI provider sit down to come up with a list of what takes place during that morning routine and what Brian's mom would like for Brian to do. And they start in the bathroom and list those routines that occur there as part of that getting ready. And Brian's mom said, hey, I had no idea that there were this many things that took place in the bathroom. And she thinks at his age, she lists out the most important ones, being brushing hair, brushing teeth, washing hands, and using the potty. And she also wants him to be more independent with either the shower or the bath, but those things happen at night and usually when the siblings are around. So she voices that she'd like to start with hand washing because that makes the most sense for them at this place and time. They do it a lot of times during the day. He also does it at childcare. He enjoys hand washing, and there's lots of different learning opportunities and targets that can be embedded easily without taking too much time out of their morning routine. So Brian's mom and the EI provider list the possibilities of targets to embed, and mom decides to keep it pretty simple to start. She wants him to start using words that she knows he can already say, but she hasn't expected him to use during the hand washing routine. He can ask for the water, soap, or a towel. He can tell her when he's all done. He can also rub his hands together and make soap bubbles to get them clean and rinse them off. And when he can do all of this, she wants to, as Catherine mentioned, up the ante and add the following directions to turn the water on and off so that he can become independent washing his hands while she's picking up the bathroom before they leave in the morning. So as I mentioned before, the central point of all of this is caregiver coaching, and coaching caregivers to embed intervention is an important component of FGRBI. As active participants, planning and practicing embedding intervention leads to that caregiver competence and confidence. To support effective implementation for caregivers, a systematic coaching plan to affirm caregivers as an agent of intervention for the child should be developed, all congruent with their IFSP plan. Goals for the child and the caregiver are identified, discussed, and implemented to build capacity of the caregiver using principles for learning. And this really just means that each caregiver is recognized as a unique learner with different preferences and motivations for learning. Systematic teaching and coaching practices that are unique to FGRBI are identified and matched to the caregiver to improve existing abilities, to help the caregiver develop new skills, and to gain a deeper understanding of their own individual practices for use in current and future situations with their child in terms of their child's development. And so part of what providers are doing are learning those different coaching strategies that can be implemented with caregivers. They're using the plan that you all as service coordinators and the ed team create with the family as their guide for their caregiver coaching practices, and using the processes that FGRBI is telling us are effective. Again, being intentional about using strategies, coaching strategies, and techniques that are individualized for the family. And this is based on research findings that are essential to the implementation, which include the importance of establishing what the learner, in our case, the parents or other caregivers, such as a child care provider, maybe grandparents, what they know and believe when entering that learning environment. Adult learning theory maintains that initially each of us, every learner, has preconceived ideas about subject matter. So for example, with early intervention, parents may be expecting the intervention to be conducted by the provider and believe that the provider is the expert and the only one who can offer intervention that makes a real difference, or that the intervention they offer is, superior to what a caregiver can provide. They may be expecting therapy in the sense of, the more traditional models, such as a medical or an educational model, and be suspicious of the use of everyday activities, play, or the use of their own objects rather than specialized toys and therapy materials. And because so many families are often new to all of the ideas and terminology associated with EI systems, also with child development, or maybe they're grappling with a diagnosis or a disability that they've just learned about with their child, all the constructs of teaching and learning with all this new information, expecting families to grasp all of that, all those details immediately really is unrealistic. It requires a consistent continuum of supports with frequent reviews and rechecks to ensure that knowledge and skills are developing. And FGRBI has those systems in place. Those are referred to as the Super and the 5Q. We're not going to go into the details of those two parts of the model today, but just wanted to let you know what those are and what they're called. In order for learners to gain deeper knowledge of particular content, they have to develop an understanding of how that knowledge can be used and generalized to other situations. So in terms of early intervention, we want to be able to use these adult learning approaches in order for families to be able to generalize what they're learning and being coached about in helping them be the agent of intervention for their child. So we like to throw these in and ask a question. What do you notice about what's different in these two photos? In the first photo, you see the caregiver sitting on the couch, observing the provider interacting with the child. And in the second photo, you see the caregiver interacting with the child while the provider observes. These photos reflect the shift to using FGRBI in practice, where it looks like the parent or caregiver is the primary interventionist as an active participant rather than sitting on the sidelines as a passive observer. And we like to refer to this as a transformation of going from couching to coaching. Okay, so at this point in the presentation, you may be thinking, I'm not an ongoing provider, so what is my role in all of this? We have another short video, and this is from the FGRBI website also, and it provides some further information about the role of the service coordinator using the FGRBI framework for early intervention service delivery.
The service coordinator is kind of the first one in the door, first one to make that connection with the family, whether it's a dedicated service coordinator or a dual role. They kind of set the stage for what the family's priorities are. They get that really good baseline information and help set everything going forward into motion to help provide the family with the best resources possible. As the state of Iowa moves towards providing family-guided routines-based intervention, it's really important that service coordinators help families from the beginning understand what early intervention and family-guided routines-based intervention is all about. That our role as service providers and service coordinators is to help the family recognize their strengths, their routines, and ways that they can help their child learn throughout the routines that they already have in their daily lives.
I play both roles as a service provider and service coordinator. I just look at it as doing everything that I can to help the child and the family. Family-guided routines-based intervention really first starts with the service coordinator, and then we really lay down the groundwork for the family of what they can expect home visits are going to look like. I collect information from the family's priorities, what their day looks like, and what they would like to do with their child. I help the family identify their plan and those goals, the guiding basis for those services.
Being the designated service coordinator, I'm usually the first contact with the family So it's important for me to help families understand family-guided routines-based intervention and that they will be an active participant in that process, and it will be more of the family leading the process and us guiding them to help their child grow and learn.
So the service coordinator really sets that stage and can help families understand FGRBI just by explaining what early intervention is. I think it's important for families to understand that routines are the building blocks of everything that their child's learning and what they're doing.
It's definitely important that service coordinators help families understand the power of routines and why routines are important. Everybody has to eat. Babies need their diaper changed. Bath times are going to happen. So it's important helping families identify their routines and why they're important. And the occurrence of those routines every day provide opportunities to work on skills with their children that they want to focus on and make that routine better.
It's really important that families know that their child is learning and can be an active participant in all parts of those routines, and that any skill that we want to work on can be embedded within the routines that they're already doing. The intervention doesn't need to be something separate. So an example of what embedded learning doesn't look like would be if a family just says, I just want him to use 50 words. I heard that's a milestone that he should have. And they're just kind of drilling him on, say ball, say blue, say bat, even if those words aren't meaningful to the child. But embedded learning, a good example of what it would look like is just throughout the day, pointing out things that they're actually doing. And maybe the child might start repeat those words back. And then when the child's ready, building in some choice making so they can let the parents know what they want, and then coaching the parents on some ways that the child can use their own verbal words or maybe some gestures if they're not quite ready to indicate what they want or need. So we're just going to embed the strategies into what the family's already doing so it's functional and important to the child and the family because they're things that they talk about and see every day.
It's really important as a service coordinator to help families reflect and understand what we're doing. So as providers are working with families, I will ask questions later. Do you understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what your role is? Because it can be confusing to understand the process.
It's important that everyone that works in early intervention, including the family, realizes that FGRBI is something that we all do as a team. It's not just something the home visitor does. It's not just something the service coordinator coordinates, and it's not just something the family does between visits. We're all a team, we're all working together, and we're all providing family-guided routines-based intervention.
Okay, so this is really a nice statement, I think. A goal without a plan is just a wish, which is something that encourages people really to take action. And I think it connects well, obviously, with early intervention. If the IFSP can be based on families' priorities, but we often leave the kind of next steps to the professional. And so we want families to be involved in that problem solving, the decision making, the action planning within each session, not just even at the beginning when that IFSP is developed. And so that's the shift for the providers right now too, is that we're asking families to help plan each session. What is it that we are going to target today? And let's practice that. So I'm not just asking you to work on something between visits that you haven't already done today. And that's a shift for a lot of providers. And so again, it's not a one-time conversation, family-guided routines-based intervention, and families do need to hear the message multiple times. And so I think we're asking that you all also encourage families to speak about their priorities, no matter whether their service provider has been trained in FGRBI or not. I think we can all begin in our early conversations with families to encourage them to speak their priorities. And those who have been trained in family-guided routines-based intervention will be able to take that and run with that. And it will set the stage for those who have yet to be trained to really start to hear families speak about their priorities. So again, early on with service coordinators during our check-ins, the eligibility determination team members can do that initially and annually when they're meeting with families to really be that active listener to hear what those family priorities are. And then those ongoing providers really should be doing it initially in that first visit and then frequently throughout all the subsequent visits. And so we have at the Early Childhood Center developed some resources. We have a talking points document to help guide conversations with families. We have a question and answer document. These really are not intended to hand to families, but to review and think about ways you can talk with families about family-guided routines-based intervention. And these resources were put together by the Early Childhood Center staff, Dr. Julianne Woods, who's the creator of the model. And then we've also consulted with a state implementation team that has some providers who are starting to use family-guided routines-based intervention, as well as parents and some agency leadership. And then, so here's just an example of one of those talking points handouts that we have available to you. And again, I think it's important to remember not all providers are being trained at the same time. And I know that makes things challenging for you to know. We are encouraging providers who are using this model to share that with the service coordinators that they're working with, to say, you know, I am being trained in family-guided routines-based intervention, and I'm attempting to use it with this family, so that you're aware. Again, it doesn't hurt. The more communication we have between providers and service coordinators, the better. So if you have questions or families are asking you questions, to encourage that open communication between the team. Again, we're starting small. Right now, this very first cohort only has 38 people that probably will move forward. And then we're going to hopefully start with a second cohort here soon. So it's going to be a slow rollout, but we can begin talking to families even when providers haven't been trained. So
Catherine, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know, I did put the link to this document to the FGRBI resources on the ECC website. I did put the link in the chat box.
Thank you. Perfect. And so you all can go in the chat box and open that up, bookmark it if you'd like, so you have access to that when we're done here. And it is important. So these talking point handouts really give you kind of the summary of what this is and how to explain it to families. But it's really important for the family to understand that we are going to be providing new information and strategies, but we're going to start with what they're already doing, and we're going to build on that up the ante kind of concept. And we don't want families to think that we're just there to ask questions and watch, although observation is a key component. And so families probably will experience a provider who does ask more questions than maybe they're used to, especially if they've had children who have gone through the program in the past. That, you know, observing a little bit more to understand how things currently work so that we can build on that. I know it was a concern for many providers initially that, you know, we have a lot of information to share. And one of the things that the group that's going through the training right now just recently discussed was that direct teaching is still part of family-guided routines-based intervention. What we find is that maybe a lot of us are just doing more direct teaching than we need to. It's okay to direct teach, put your hands on the child. That is typically how we can model new information, new strategies. But then we want to pass that off to the parent and make sure that they're doing it as well, that they're comfortable, that it fits into their routine. Because if it doesn't, what we know about adult learning is that it likely won't happen in between visits. And so again, really shifting how we do things to align with what we know about how adults learn, and not just what we know about how children learn. Again, just kind of the second half of some of those talking points. I'm going to keep moving here. And like I mentioned earlier, this isn't really something that is intended to hand to families. It really is a tool for you to guide your conversations. And all families learn differently. So it may just be a part of this resource, or a part of this conversation that you start with. So here is what that website looks like. And like Nancy said, she's already popped the link to this page into the the chat box. So go ahead and copy it or open it up right now if you want to make sure it's open on your computer. The Family Guided Routines-Based Intervention website is also a great resource if you want to look at it together with a family or on your own. There are videos on there for watching, so plenty of resources and information there if you're looking to learn more. A whole section on resources for families that is available if you have a family who has questions, or again, if you're just looking for more information so that you feel like you're better able to explain what's happening. And then just kind of a brief connection. The Life Course Framework model is a model that many of you may have heard about, but it's really a way of helping individuals and families develop what we call a vision for a good life, really think about what they need to know and do, how to identify and to find or develop supports and discover what it takes to really live the life they want to live. And this family guided routines-based intervention model really crosswalks perfectly well with the Life Course model in thinking about making the family's priorities be the driver of what's happening, and as opposed to us coming in and guiding that process ourselves. And so the two really fit well with one another, the two initiatives. And I'm just going to skip past that as we move along, so we have a few minutes for questions here. But really today is about having the tools to be a cheerleader for the new approach. What we want as we begin to roll this model out with more and more providers is we want families to feel comfortable, we want families to be informed, and we want families to be excited about FGRBI. We want the same for providers and really for the whole team that's working with the family. And you all are the start of that conversation. And so we hope that the communication can continue to be open, and that we can kind of support ongoing providers as they go through this initiative by having the information we need and the communication to move forward. So I am going to pop over to the final slide, which we do have a QR code, and I think Nancy will also put this in the chat if it's easier for you to go there. That has a quick survey, and then we'll also provide you a certificate for today for participation in today's session. And I'm going to leave that up for just a minute. And I know we are right at the end of our time. But if anyone has questions, I know we're a big group, but if you want to unmute, I have not been monitoring the chat much, so I'll try to kind of scroll through to see if there's anything in there. And again, if we don't get your question today, we will kind of make sure we get back with you. I love the question about the family assessment. I think that is a key place of beginning those conversations. And so I really appreciate that you made kind of that connection about bringing in those family priorities into that family assessment. So that's something that we can continue, and probably not as much a deep conversation about it today, but I think you're really on the right track when you start thinking about that family assessment. What are the tools we already have and we use? And how can we, instead of, not looking to create more, but we're just really kind of looking to shift the conversation to really get at the family's priorities. Anybody else with a question, comment that they'd like to touch on before we end the conversation?
Catherine, someone mentioned that the survey link is not working, so I'm double checking that right now.
Okay.
I know we checked the QR code yesterday and it was working, but I didn't think to check the actual code.
I can put the QR code back up for those of you who said you're having trouble with the link. If you want to try that as a secondary option.
Now they're saying the QR code isn't working either. So all right, let's try this again.
I can.
Catherine, is this the same link that we've used for? This is not the same one we used for
Not
previous.
the same as, no, it is not the same link that we use for the webinars.
Okay. So it looks like some people are able to get it to work. Link in the chat worked. I was able to complete it. It was just slow loading.
So I will not end, I am not going to end the meeting yet. I'll just stop recording though, so that if people are having trouble, if it's loading slowly, we're getting a few more saying, yep, they've had success. So if you need to hop in the chat again, but I won't end the meeting to continue to give everyone a chance. I'm hearing, it sounds like the link in the chat is having the most success.